Okay, hey, so good morning, everyone. Let's get going. Today we'll be working on paradox and evaluate questions. A lot of the work in these questions will depend on the work we've already done for strengthen and weaken, particularly in evaluate questions, and that's where we're going to get started. Right, so let's take a quick look at the task in evaluate questions. Basically, in evaluate questions, what the GMAT is asking is what additional information would you like or would help you check whether the argument is good or bad? So let's quickly understand what we will see in the question. So the question will give us some sort of argument or some sort of plan, right? And we have to figure out whether that's a good argument or a bad argument or a good plan or a bad plan. Just broadly speaking, we can look at this sort of question as a combination of strengthen and weaken. Now, we'll discuss what this means in just a second. When you see an evaluate question, what do you have to do? It's nothing too complicated. Basically, what you need to do is you need to start, or the most important thing for you to do at the beginning is to identify the conclusion. So if you have an argument, identify the conclusion. And if you have a plan, you identify the desired outcome, which means that, you look for what they want. So what they want to happen. Now, the thing with these evaluate questions is the correct option is not going to give you a particular answer. It's not going to tell you whether the argument or plan is good or bad. But if you were to get a response to that option, then that would either strengthen or weaken the conclusion or outcome that you're looking at. Now, this is much easier to see with an example. So let me put an example up over here. Right. So this statement says the plane will successfully crash land in the river. I want you to take your time and tell me what you think about this. If this is the statement that's given to you, right? Then what kind of information would you want that'll help you check whether this is more likely to happen or less likely to happen? Whenever you're ready, please unmute and let me know.
So maybe something like, is the river wide enough to accommodate the plane?
Very good. So Kush has given us a great option for this. Is the river wide enough, right? Now, look at how his option actually ends with like a question mark. So the thing is, he hasn't told us that the river is wide enough. And he has not said that the river is not wide enough. So what he's saying is, if I had to evaluate this, like check how likely or not likely it is to happen, this is one of the pieces of information that could help me do that. This is the question that I would ask if I wanted to evaluate this particular or the likelihood of this particular statement. This is what an option is going to look like, right? So the option will not give you the answer, but it is the information that you would want in order to take a call on this. Now, this strengthen and weaken business. Basically, it's like this. If the option goes one way, like if it goes yes, then it's going to either strengthen or weaken. And if it goes no, it's going to either weaken or strengthen. So the opposite of what the first one is doing. So, is the river wide enough? If the answer is yes, then that makes it more likely that the plane will successfully crash land in the river. So that strengthens. And if the answer is no, then that makes it less likely that the plane will successfully crash land in the river. So that's going to weaken. Quick check, is everyone comfortable with the task that we have in evaluate questions? This yes no business that one of them will strengthen or weaken and the other one will do the opposite.
Hi, Ajitesh, can you hear me?
Yeah, Shashank, please go ahead.
So, my question here is that the correct option should have a polarizing effect, right? It should go give you basically the right answer would be the one that has two effects at the same time, right? So when you say yes, it strengthens. When you say no, it weakens. At least for in this example.
That is correct. So
Okay.
in most of these options, you're going to see, a sort of weather sort of situation, like the word weather. So let me just put that up. So that's going to typically lead to a yes no outcome. It's also possible that it can lead to other outcomes, but typically we're going to be looking at yes and no. So you're absolutely right. That's what these options are going to look like. I mean, imagine that you are a consultant, right? And the client wants you to do something or wants a particular outcome. Now, as a consultant, you would not already have the information that you would need, but you would be in a good position to ask the right questions. So that's what you want to look at yourself as doing in these questions. You're just looking for information. You're not going to get the answer to the questions that you're asking, but you need to ask the right questions. That's evaluate. Shashank, quick check. Make sense?
Yeah, it does. And also, just one more following question is, will the incorrect option not have this polarizing effect?
Oh, that's a very good question. No, so incorrect options can have this, but when they go yes or no, it's not going to strengthen weaken,
Okay, got it.
right? Excellent. All right, we're almost ready to move on to our first question. Just for the sake of taking another example, the plane will successfully crash land in the river. I don't know if you guys remember this, but there was a very famous crash landing in New York a long time back. And they made a movie on that, a Tom Hanks movie called Sully. Over there, I think one of the issues was that the pilot was extremely experienced, right? So if the statement says the plane will successfully crash land in the river, another option for that could be something like, is the pilot experienced enough to pull off a successful crash landing in the river? Then you can ask yourself, if I get a yes to that, does it strengthen or weaken? If I get a no to that, does it strengthen or weaken? That's how you check the correct answer in these questions. All right, now we are ready to move on to the first question. Please go ahead. You have 2.5 minutes. All right, guys, that's 2.5 minutes. Let's get going on this question. Now, I'm just going to quickly summarize the information that we have, and then there are these options that I would like you guys to walk me through. Let's quickly go through this. The City Council, so Traverton City Council, wants to minimize the city's average yearly expenditure on its traffic signal lights, and they're planning to replace the incandescent bulbs with LEDs. And they've given us a little bit of information about these LEDs. What they're basically saying is LEDs consume significantly less energy, right? So, significantly less energy and cost no more to purchase. So, in terms of cost, they are either as good as the other ones or they are cheaper. And the final piece of information they've given to us is that the costs associated with the conversion of existing fixtures so as to accept LED arrays would be minimal. So, converting the fixtures to accept LED bulbs would not be expensive, or it would be trivial. Now let's take a look at the question stem. Which of the following would it be most useful to know in determining whether switching to LED arrays would be likely to help minimize Traverton's yearly maintenance costs? So, this is important for us because it tells us what we are trying to do over here. Now, let's take a look at our options. The correct answer over here is option A, whether the expected service life of LED arrays is at least as long as that of currently used incandescent bulbs. So the bulbs that we're currently using, do the LED bulbs last, at least as long as those bulbs that we're currently using? So, it's all very well that your LED bulbs are cheaper and they use significantly less energy. But if they don't last as long, right, if they need to be changed more frequently, then that could really hurt the plan. Now, let's see what happens when we go a yes on this and what happens when we go with a no on this. And this is my first question to you guys. Tell me what happens when we get a yes to option A and what happens when we get a no to option A.
Yeah, if you get a yes, so it will strengthen
Very good.
because the basically self life of the lights are almost similar. So the cost will it's strengthens the point that this cost will reduce, and if it is no, then it weakens.
Very good. So, what Shohini is telling us is if the expected life is at least as long, then yeah, your LEDs don't cost more, they use significantly less energy, and they last at least as long. So, it's going to tell you that, yeah, this bulb may actually help you reduce your yearly maintenance costs, right? So, when you need to swap these bulbs or when you need to switch these bulbs out because they're not working, then do LEDs actually help you minimize the cost associated with that? If we get a no on this, that they need to be changed more frequently than the currently used incandescent bulbs, then that could hurt what these guys want, right? So, very good. Now, let me just get a quick check. Are we comfortable with what Shohini has given us over here for option A? Excellent. Now, there are two options, if I remember correctly, that I really want you guys to walk me through. First one is option B, and the next one is D, D for Delta. Let's start with B for Bravo. When you're ready, please unmute and tell me why we take B out. Why option B is not good for us.
Yeah, so I think that's probably because it's out of scope, right? Because the entire passage is about comparing the effectiveness of LEDs versus incandescent bulbs. We may not be necessarily interested in knowing alternative options, right? If kind of bulb or yeah, works better than LEDs. That is not the, that's not what the argument, or sorry, that's not what the conclusion is trying to get at.
Very good. And you know what, Shashank? This is actually what I was looking for. So you read option B precisely, right? That is what I was looking for. You guys may be surprised to know that most people who read option B, they end up missing this word other than. This option, they will read it as whether any cities have switched from incandescent lights to LED arrays. They kind of miss this other than over there. But if we don't make that mistake, right? If we keep in mind that option B is basically saying that, hey, look, are there any other cities that have switched from these older bulbs to things other than LEDs? All that may tell you is that the incandescent bulbs may not be, let's say, desirable. But whether LED arrays are going to be better than the incandescent bulbs, that's not what B is going to help you figure out, right? So Shashank is absolutely correct on this one. B, the information that we will get by asking B is not going to help us evaluate LED arrays. So B is out. Now, very quickly, let me take option C out. Whether the company from which Traverton currently buys incandescent bulbs for traffic signals also sells LED arrays. Now, we really have to ask ourselves who cares whether the same company also sells LED arrays, right? Maybe Traverton will be using a different company or they will buy LED arrays from a different company. So, this seems to be completely, it doesn't seem to be helpful. Now, let's come to that second option that I want you guys on. Option D, whether Traverton City Council plans to increase the number of traffic signal lights in Traverton. Think about it, let me know. Why is this one not going to be helpful when it comes to evaluating their desired outcome?
So this is how I thought about it. If they plan to increase the number of traffic signals and they only use the bulbs, I mean the present bulbs that they are using, the cost will, I mean, we have to compare the cost between the increased bulbs versus increased LED bulbs, right?
Excellent. So effectively, what Kush is telling us is, for example, if right now we have 1,000 traffic signal lights, and maybe afterwards they want maybe 2,000. The point is, we would still need information about whether the LEDs are better than the incandescent bulbs or not. So, are the LED arrays going to help us minimize Traverton's yearly maintenance costs? This is not telling us whether the LEDs are going to be better. Or let me put it this way, this is not giving us any additional information to help us evaluate whether LEDs are going to help Traverton minimize its yearly maintenance costs. So, if the number of traffic signal lights increases, that is, we get a yes to this, then what's going to happen? Overall maintenance costs will go up. That is pretty straightforward. But what we were looking for is to check whether the LED bulbs will help us reduce the yearly maintenance costs or minimize the yearly maintenance costs. So even if the overall maintenance costs go up, will switching to LEDs help us reduce them or not? Option D is not answering that. Similarly, a no will not help us either. Okay, good. Now let's turn to the last option, whether the crews that currently replace incandescent bulbs in Traverton's traffic signals know how to convert the existing fixtures so as to accept LED arrays. Why not take this one? Simran, I see that you've raised your hand. Please go ahead.
Yeah, I have a question in option D. So basically, I understand it doesn't say anything about the LED lights, but even option A doesn't specify whether it will reduce the cost or not, right? How I read option D was the passage already says that LED moving to LED lights will not cost anymore, and it will reduce the overall cost. So I sort of just assumed that even if the council plans to increase the number of LED lights, it will, on an overall level, it will still reduce the cost.
So, I think in the stimulus, they haven't told us that the overall cost will go down. That is their objective. But let's go back. We can confirm that. So they are looking to minimize, right? They want to minimize the city's average yearly expenditures. And what information do we have about LEDs? Yeah, they consume significantly less energy and they cost no more to purchase. Remember that. So the buy cost is not higher, right? But we don't know about the operating cost. So in the STEM, when they say would be likely to help minimize Traverton's yearly maintenance costs, what happens with your maintenance costs? You're going to have to deal with the upkeep of the bulbs, right? Which could involve switching them out. So if that switching out happens and if it's at the same frequency, then yes, your LED bulbs are going to be better. Why? Because they're not more expensive and they consume less energy. But if the frequency is higher, then what happens, right? That's what option A is getting at. Simran, does that make sense?
Yes, that makes sense. Thank you.
Awesome. And now let's finish with E. Why is E out?
It's again irrelevant.
Why is it irrelevant?
If the crew does not know how to replace, the council can get a different crew, maybe. That's why.
Absolutely. So there is nothing over here that tells us that the same crews, right, that currently replace the incandescent bulbs are the ones that have to convert the existing fixtures so as to accept LED arrays. That switch over to LEDs, that could be handled by somebody else for all we know. Now, to add to Simran's point, if we go back to the stimulus, there are two things that we want to look at. The first one is the costs associated with the conversion of existing fixtures so as to accept LED arrays would be minimal. So, whether the crews know how to do this or they don't know how to do this, that cost would be a subset of the overall cost. And the question has already told us that the overall cost is going to be minimal. So at the end of the day, whatever the cost of this is going to be, that converting the fixtures to accept LED arrays, it's not going to be more than minimal. And one more thing we should look at is this conversion of the fixtures to accept LED arrays. It seems like a one-time kind of cost, whereas the question is more about the yearly maintenance costs. Now, you're not going to convert the fixtures from incandescent to LED every year, right? So it really seems as if option E, or the information that option E would give us, is not going to be particularly useful. All right. Now, before we move on to the next question, let me have a quick yes if you're comfortable. A, two things. If you're comfortable with this question, and B, if you're comfortable looking at these options as, like a yes, no, one of them will strengthen, one of them will weaken, because we need to apply that in the next two questions. Okay, excellent. So we started off with an easy question. Now we're going to move on to a medium question, and we'll finish with a hard question. Please go ahead. 2.5 minutes. All right, guys, that's 2.5 minutes. Now, first, please check your answers. The correct answer in this question is option C, C for Charlie. And the option that I want you guys to really focus on is option B, B for Bravo. So, in my experience, option B is the most, let's say, it is the option that a lot of people are tempted to mark. Now, let's take a look at the information given to us. If Morganville wants to keep its central shopping district healthy, it should prevent the opening of a huge save all discount store on the outskirts of Morganville. So you've got Morganville, and there's a central shopping district. So let's call this CSD. And possibly there's going to be a save all that's opening on the outskirts. Let's call that SA. And the reason that the community activist gives us is that whenever a save all has opened, in a small town, right, outside the central shopping district, within 5 years, the bankruptcy rate is more than a quarter of the stores. So the bankruptcy rate is more than 25%. So the information that they've given us is pretty straightforward. This bankruptcy rate, that's the support for the conclusion that if Morganville wants to keep its central shopping district healthy, it should prevent the opening of a huge save all discounts department store on the outskirts of Morganville. The STEM is also quite straightforward. The answer to which of the following would be most useful for evaluating the community activists' reasoning? So, a lot of these evaluate questions will use the word evaluate itself. Option A. Have community activists in other towns successfully campaigned against the opening of a Save All store on the outskirts of their towns? So the answer to this could be yes or it could be no, right? But all that this information will tell us is whether they've been successful or not. But the reasoning, right? So the reasoning that the community activist is using, is that correct or not? The thing about bankruptcy rates, etc., etc. So this information won't help us evaluate that, the reasoning of the community activist. Now, please remember, we can come back to these other options as well, like A, D, and E. But first, I'd like you guys on B and C. So, firstly, tell me, oh, hang on, it's up to you. You can either tell me why C is correct and then tell me why B is wrong, or you can start with B. It's up to you. Whenever you're ready, please unmute and let me know.
Ajitesh, I want to add something for B. So, what is coming in my mind looking at this option is that even if we are saying in Morganville, like the large percentage of the residents may be shopping at the stores, but it doesn't tell us that what proportion of the total customers of the stores constitute this residents, right? There may be possibility that people from outside of the city coming to shop in this district.
That is correct. So maybe the central shopping district doesn't depend on residents of Morganville. Maybe their business is coming from people outside Morganville, right? I think that's your point.
Yes, so it doesn't actually tell us that if the people stop coming here, it will strengthen, like, will it affect the sales of the stores?
Right. And the second thing over here, and this is where I feel a lot of people make a mistake. If you go back to the stimulus, what you will see about the Save All discount store is that it's possibly going to open on the outskirts of Morganville. Now, while reading the stimulus, some people make a mistake and they think that this means that Save All is not going to be inside Morganville. That's a mistake. Save All is going to be inside Morganville. Outskirts just means, the places that are like a little far away, like on the edge, closer to the edge or the border. But it doesn't mean outside, it does mean inside. So that's a mistake that we should not make. So option B says, do a large percentage of the residents of Morganville currently do almost all their shopping at stores in Morganville? We know that there is a central shopping district, right? We know that the Save All may open on the outskirts. The problem with option B is it's saying, do the Morganville people currently do almost all their shopping in Morganville, right? Now, imagine that you get the answer to this yes, no, right? A large percentage of the residents, yes, they currently do almost all their shopping. Or no, a large percentage does not do its shopping in Morganville. The problem is the central shopping district is still threatened by the Save All, right? So whether a large percentage are doing their shopping in Morganville or not, the threat to the central shopping district is still very much on, right? So option B is not helping us understand whether Save All is going to hurt the central shopping district or it's not going to hurt the central shopping district. And that's the problem with option B. It gives us no idea about the impact that Save All will have. So even if a small percentage of residents do their shopping in Morganville, or a large percentage does its shopping in Morganville, the central shopping district still has some business to protect, right? Will it be able to protect that business against Save All? Option B does not help us understand that. Quick check. Is option B okay, or any follow up questions regarding option B?
I had one question, Ajitesh, regarding this, and I think that ties back to the stimulus itself, right? So the way I saw this was the activist is saying that let's just call this prevent the opening of the store on the outskirts as X, right? So the community activists are basically saying that X should not happen, but he's giving Y as the evidence because I noticed a difference here, right? That opening something on the outskirts of Morganville is not the same as opening a store outside the central shopping district. It could just be, you know, right outside the central shopping district, or it could be really farther away, like for example, the outskirts. So I don't think the proximity is exchangeable here. right? If you kind of understand what I'm trying to say. So
Absolutely.
yeah, so by that extent, we can't really say that because everything is still at the end of the day inside Morganville, right? Be it on the outskirts or right outside the shopping district. I mean, what I'm trying to say, it still falls under Morganville, so it doesn't make a difference if it's in Morganville or the outskirts of Morganville. Basically, I'm just saying that it all belongs to Morganville. So whether they're close or farther should make no difference, right? Is that the logic you're trying to use here in option B?
So the reason I gave for option B was slightly different, but what you are saying is also valid. So the reasoning of the community activist is basically the support that the community activist uses is for a save wall that opens anywhere outside the central shopping district, right? And the
Yeah,
outskirts are a part of that. So
exactly.
yeah. So we have no information about, how much farther away from the central shopping district we need to be. So that's not really going to help us. So in that sense, option B is not correct. But the point that I was trying to make is slightly different. Let me explain it this way, right? So instead of a large percentage of the residents, let me change that slightly to a large percentage of the expenditure by the residents, right? So imagine that the residents spend maybe $1 billion, right? If it's a large, like very large percentage. And if it's a small percentage, maybe they spend, I don't know, maybe 100,000, like a really small number. Oh, hang on. Did I just write 100,000 K? Sorry. I meant to write 100,000. So the point is whether the revenue of the central shopping district is 100,000 or it's 1 billion, the community activist still wants to protect it from save all, right? So
Right.
whatever the revenue is, maybe it's a small amount, maybe it's a large amount, we still need to understand what impact save all will have on that. And that's what option B does not tell us. B just says, okay, I'll give you this information. Do a large percentage do their shopping in Morganville or do they not do their shopping in Morganville? But is Save All going to affect the central shopping district? That's still missing in option B. Quick check, Shashank, make sense?
Yeah, understood.
Perfect. Now let's move to the correct option. Again, I'd like you guys on this. Let me know whenever you're ready.
Hi, Ajitesh. So here I was thinking about this option that why it is correct one, because if in a typical 5 year period the bankruptcy rate of the stores is more than 25%, then we can't blame Save All for the bankruptcy reason.
Good. I think let's put what Shohini is saying, let's put that in the form of this, outcome sort of way of looking at it. So if the proportion of stores during a typical 5 year period, the bankruptcy rate is, let's say, 80%, then what happens? If the bankruptcy rate is, I don't know, 5%, then what happens? And of course, if it's closer to 25%, so 25% or thereabouts, right? Hang on. In fact, let's go back a step. The information that we have says that, look, if you have a save all, then the typical bankruptcy rate, right? So I like to call this the natural rate of bankruptcy is more than 25% in other small towns. But what we also need to ask ourselves is, okay, that's what happens when a save all is there. What happens when a save all is not there? What happens to the bankruptcy rate of stores in the central shopping district? So, if without a save all, the bankruptcy rate is, let's say, 5%, so the normal or natural bankruptcy rate, then that tells us that save all is not good for the central shopping district. So, without a save all, you get 5% bankruptcy. And with a save all, you get more than 25% bankruptcy, right? So that would tell us that the save all is not good. And I mean, the other extreme, if with a save all, you have more than 25%, but without a save all, the normal rate of bankruptcy is 80%, then that's going to hurt the community activists' reasoning. It would actually mean that the save all is actually good for the central shopping district. And just in case anybody is wondering how a save all could possibly be good for the central shopping district, right? I'll just give you a quick example. If you imagine like a large mall, right? malls often give discounts to movie theaters. Like when you go to a large mall, you would almost certainly see a movie theater over there, right? Does anybody know why this happens? Like, why do malls actually try to get movie theaters to set up in malls, give them discounts? Why do they do that?
Maybe to attract people.
Absolutely, because movie theaters create a lot of footfall. So, movie theaters pull people in, and those people are actually good for the other stores in the mall. So, the save all, in a way, may actually help other stores. We don't know. The point is, if without a save all, the bankruptcy rate is 80%, and with a save all, it is more than 25%, then the save all is probably good for the central shopping district. And if it is around that 25% mark, then what it means is the save all really has no impact. Quick check. Let me know if you guys are comfortable with why option C is correct. Option C is helping us compare the information that the community activist has given us with the natural bankruptcy rate.
I just had one question again, like because I think the way I interpreted this was option C is basically asking us to do an apples to apples comparison, and and it helps us to remove what I would call a coincidence factor, right? So what I was thinking of in this case was we basically want to compare healthy central shopping districts with healthy central shopping districts. Is that
That
rationale correct?
that seems to be absolutely fine. And option C is talking about healthy central shopping districts, so that seems fine.
Yeah, that's basically how I looked at it. I just want to know if that reasoning made sense. Yeah.
It does. Awesome.
All right.
Now
Thank you.
let's take a look at D. What proportion of the employees at the Save All store on the outskirts of Morganville will be drawn from Morganville? Mm, how many or what proportion of the employees are local? That doesn't help you understand whether the Save All is going to hurt the central shopping district or not. And E. Do newly opened Save All stores ever lose money during the first 5 years of operation? Whether these guys lose money or not, again, that doesn't help you understand the impact that Save All will have on the central shopping district. So whether you get a yes answer to this or a no answer to this, do they lose money? Do they not lose money? It won't help you understand whether the central shopping district is going to be hurt by the opening of the Save All. Awesome. Quick check. Let me get a yes on this. If everyone's comfortable with this question, then we'll move on to the final question, which is a high difficulty question. All right, I've got 3 yeses. Quick check. Shohini, is this one okay? Excellent. All right, guys. Time for the third question. Please go ahead. You have 2.5 minutes. All right, everyone, that's 2.5 minutes. Now, let's go through the information and the stimulus before we get to the right answer. And of course, you can check the right answer right now. The correct answer to this question is option B, B for Bravo. But before we get to the correct option, let me do one thing. Let me break this down into two parts. This question about the pineal gland. What is the conclusion over here? And what is the support? What is the conclusion?
The conclusion is the last part, the neural pathways by which the pineal gland receives information from the eye probably does not pass through the visual cortex.
That is absolutely correct. Now, would you agree that the support is everything before that?
Yes.
Yes.
Perfect. So Kush and Shashank have confirmed. Simran and Shohini, just a quick check. Are we okay with looking at the first 3 lines or so as the support? Okay, I think we've got a confirmation. Perfect. Now, I'm not going to draw this in a correct sort of way, but let's just imagine it that the whole structure looks like this. You've got the human eye, light. It detects light, and there's a neural pathway that connects the human eye to the pineal gland. So let's call this PG, right? Now, the conclusion is that this neural pathway does not pass through the visual cortex. So let's say there is a visual cortex somewhere. The neural pathway does not go through that. That's what they're saying. And the support for this is that many people who are totally blind due to lesions in the visual cortex of the brain. Now, this is something we need to be careful about. The support over here is not about people who are generally blind. They are blind in a very specific way. And what is the cause of their blindness? Lesions. Lesions means some sort of damage. Damage to the visual cortex of the brain, right? So imagine why a person may go blind. They may go blind because of, let's say, problems in their eyes, right? These guys are saying, okay, look, we're not talking about those types of people. We're talking about people who are totally blind due to damage to the visual cortex of the brain. So the support for this is that people who are totally blind due to damage to the visual cortex of the brain, they are able to easily maintain a 24-hour sleep-wake cycle. And therefore, we can say that the neural pathway does not pass through the visual cortex. So their reasoning is, if the neural pathway did pass through the visual cortex, right, what would happen? These people have a damaged visual cortex, so they should not be able to maintain a 24-hour sleep-wake cycle. That's their logic. So they are saying that these people whose visual cortex is damaged, they are able to maintain a 24-hour sleep-wake cycle. So the neural pathway does not pass through the blue part. The neural pathway is the red part. Quick check, is everyone comfortable with the argument that's been given to us before we head to the correct option? Okay, I think I've got a yes from Simran. How about the rest of us? I think Shohini has possibly also confirmed. Perfect. So I think everyone's comfortable with this. Awesome. Now let's move on to option B directly. B says whether the melatonin levels of most totally blind people who successfully maintain a 24-hour sleep-wake cycle change in response to changes in exposure to light and darkness. Just to recap the situation that we have, the conclusion is that the neural pathway does not pass through the visual cortex. Option B is asking us or telling us, okay, look, this is the information that you can get. Whether the melatonin levels of most totally blind people who successfully maintain a 24-hour sleep-wake cycle change in response to changes in exposure to light and darkness. Let's do a yes/no on this. If the answer is, let's start with no, the melatonin levels of most totally blind people who maintain, remember, who maintain a 24-hour sleep-wake cycle don't change. So if they are able to maintain, so let's write that 24-hour cycle, check, they are able to maintain it. But the melatonin levels don't change, right? When light and darkness levels change. If that's the case, then that effectively tells us that the pineal gland is not really working or activated, right? This is not what is helping them maintain the 24-hour sleep-wake cycle. Now, why am I saying this? Because the stimulus told us that normally the pineal gland, that's what controls the 24-hour sleep-wake cycle by secreting melatonin. So that is what normally happens. But if someone is able to get the same outcome, that is, they are able to maintain a 24-hour sleep-wake cycle without the pineal gland changing its melatonin levels, if that's happening, that means there is some other way to maintain the 24-hour sleep-wake cycle. Let me have a yes on this if you're comfortable, or unmute. Basically, the point that I'm trying to make is normally the pineal gland is what controls the 24-hour sleep wake cycle. But if you are able to achieve the same objective, 24-hour sleep wake cycle, without any changes in the melatonin levels, that means there is some other way of executing that 24-hour sleep wake cycle. And it could be anything. Maybe blind people respond to the temperature, right? So when it's evening or night, it gets colder. When it's daytime, it gets warmer. Maybe they're responding to that. Maybe they're not responding to the light levels, but to the temperature. So if they're able to maintain a 24-hour sleep wake cycle without the melatonin levels changing, it means they are doing this using something other than the pineal gland. Quick check. Let me have a yes on this if you're sure or not sure. Okay, Shohini's confirmed. How about the rest of us? Okay, excellent. Now let's take a look at what happens if we get a yes to option B. So yes would tell us the melatonin levels of most totally blind people who successfully maintain a 24-hour sleep-wake cycle, those melatonin levels do actually change in response to exposure to light and darkness. So what would this mean? This would mean that the pineal gland is getting activated. And if the pineal gland is getting activated, that means the information has to reach the pineal gland. So if the information has to reach the pineal gland, then the conclusion is strengthened. Why? Because then it's more likely, remember, not 100% certain, but more likely that the neural pathway does not pass through the damaged visual cortex. So if the pineal gland is getting activated, then it's more likely that the neural pathway does not pass through the damaged part of the brain. And if the pineal gland is not getting activated, that means the conclusion may be wrong. The neural pathway may be passing through the visual cortex. Because if the pineal gland is not even in play over here, if it's not getting activated, then we can't say, right, whether the neural pathway is not passing through the visual cortex. Again, I'm not 100% sure I've explained this properly. Just a quick check. Are we comfortable with this or doubts? Let me have a yes or no on this.
I'm not sure if I can explain this, but so basically the question, the option says in response to changes in exposure to light and darkness. It doesn't say whether there is going to be more exposure to light or more exposure to darkness, right? Say, for instance, there's more exposure to light and the melatonin levels change, then it weakens the conclusion, right?
So I think you may be reading it a little differently. What they mean by that is if the light levels change, then the melatonin levels change.
And if the melatonin levels change, then that means it is basically the visual cortex is getting is active.
Not the
Is that
visual cortex, the pineal gland.
pineal gland is active? That's what it means, right?
Right.
If the melatonin levels change.
Right.
Um,
So the melatonin levels change in response to changes in exposure to light and darkness. So if there's a change in your light or darkness, right, the melatonin levels respond to that.
doesn't that weaken the conclusion?
Why would you think that it weakens the conclusion?
Um, because the conclusion says that if the person is blind, then the visual cortex is damaged, and their sleep cycle is maintained because of other factors. But if the light levels are changing, as option B
No, no,
says,
hold on. No, that's not what the stimulus says. Let me quickly recap what the stimulus says. And let me also just introduce one more thing from my side. Okay, so say that this is the eye, right? And this is the light that's hitting the eye. Now, the eye, there's a neural pathway connecting the eye to the pineal gland, right? Now, we don't know the path yet. Let me introduce one more thing over here, which is not there in the question. Let's say there is some sort of alternative, right? So, let's say temperature sensing part of the brain. Now, either of these things could help you achieve your 24-hour sleep wake cycle. Now, if someone is able to maintain a 24-hour sleep wake cycle, right, when the visual cortex is damaged and their pineal gland is not working or it is not changing the melatonin levels, what does that mean? It is the alternative, right? The temperature mechanism that's working. Simran, quick check.
Yes, sir.
So if they're able to maintain the 24-hour sleep wake cycle and the pineal gland is not changing the melatonin levels, that means the second one must be what is actually helping them achieve the 24-hour sleep wake cycle, right? So if the alternative mechanism is what is actually helping you maintain the 24-hour sleep wake cycle, then in that case, the neural pathway can go anywhere it wants, right? It doesn't have to get information to the pineal gland, right? It may be passing through the damaged portion of the visual cortex. Simran, quick check.
Yes, sir. I got it.
Because the pineal gland is not doing anything, we don't care if the information gets to it or not. But if the pineal gland is activated, that means the information is getting to it, which means it is less likely that the pathway is passing through the damaged area and more likely that it is not passing through the damaged area. Final check, Simran. Make sense?
Yes, thank you.
Excellent. All right, now that was definitely one of the hardest evaluate questions. Before we move on, any other options that you'd like to discuss? Any other options that you felt could actually help us evaluate whether the neural pathway passes through the visual cortex or not? Basically, any doubts? Let me have a yes if we can move on to paradox questions. Okay. I don't know whether that yes is because you just want to get away from this question, but paradox is also a lot of fun. Let's shift to paradox. All right, now the task with paradox again is quite straightforward. Basically, we're being asked to reconcile seemingly contradictory statements. So there'll be two statements, or you can think of them as situations. And it seems as if, okay, look, if the first one is happening, the second one should not be happening. Your task is to show how both of them can be happening at the same time, right? So one of them, given one, the other one should not happen. But what do we have to do? We have to show how they can both happen at the same time. Now, the process is very straightforward. It's again to identify the statements that seem to be contradictory, or the situation, you can think of it as the situation, then understand. So once you've identified the statements, understand why it's unexpected, right? Why is it surprising that the second one happens given the first one has happened? And then pick an option that shows how the two can coexist. So, how is it possible that two seemingly contradictory statements can both be true at the same time? That's the task. So, your task is to resolve the paradox. So, there's a paradox, two things that are seemingly contradictory. You need to show how they can both be happening or true at the same time. Quick check. Let me have a yes on this before we move to the next practice question. Okay, excellent. All right, guys. Now, this is a medium difficulty question. It's a good question. Please go ahead. You have 2.5 minutes. Okay, guys, that's 2.5 minutes. Please check your answers. The correct answer is option A for alpha. Now, there are two options that I think we should definitely discuss. There's option B and C. So, options B and C, the second and third options. Now, before we get to any of these options, can someone just explain the paradox?
I think it basically says here that, for example, in today's world where product, development has reached a point where special advantages are equal, basically meaning that the quality of the products that you see on the market today are pretty much the same. Therefore, there's no pre-established fact that because something has a brand name, then it is of going to naturally offer a higher quality. So that advantage doesn't exist, right? Because the quality of products are now the same because of technology and other factors. The paradox here is that even though the quality is the same, the brand name inherently poses a strong marketing advantage. So that's the point. Even though the qualities are the same, how is it that the brand names, the names themselves have a strong marketing effect?
Very good. Your summary was actually very accurate. I would just request you not to leave the part about higher prices out, right? So you latched onto the part about quality, that there are no quality advantages, but don't forget that the pricing is also not a problem. Agreed?
Correct. Yeah. Okay.
Perfect.
Yeah.
So brand name products don't give us higher quality, nor do they have a price disadvantage, right? So they don't sell at higher prices. That's the information that we have. So let's just quickly summarize that. Brand name products don't give us higher quality, nor do they sell at higher prices. And as Shashank mentioned, the paradox is that somehow brand names are a bigger marketing advantage than ever. Excellent. So that summary is spot on. The stem says which of the following, if true, most helps to resolve the paradox. So in paradox questions, they will most likely use the word paradox, or they will say, the surprising finding. So it's some sort of surprise, or they will say which of the following helps to reconcile the discrepancy, right? Something like that. But paradox is a very, very common word to see in the stem. Okay.
Ajitesh, one question
Yeah. Yeah,
here.
please.
So, branded products inherently, because they've been branded for so long, or the fact that they do have a well-renowned brand, that itself is propelling the revenue, right? It's not that it's the higher quality or the higher prices, but just inherently having a brand name is what is driving the sales.
Oh, we should be careful here. So, I don't think we have any reason to think about the past, nor do we have a reason to link it to revenue. So the first situation is exactly what you said, right? They don't offer higher quality, nor do they sell at higher prices. But the second situation is brand names are a bigger marketing advantage than ever. And that's how we should look at it. They're a marketing advantage. Whether that translates to higher revenue or not, we're not sure. Or at least the question doesn't say anything on that.
Okay, okay. So marketing advantage in this case, what exactly, according to you, does that mean? Um,
A marketing advantage would just mean that it is easier for you to sell your product in some way.
okay, okay, got it.
Awesome. All right, now let's take a look at option A. Brand names are taken by consumers as a guarantee of getting a product as good as the best rival products. Now, this helps us reconcile the discrepancy. So remember, branded products don't have higher quality, right? But if in the minds of consumers, brand names are taken as a guarantee of getting a product as good as the best rival products, that explains why it's a marketing advantage. So look at it this way. There may be two companies that are manufacturing the same thing, basically, but one of them has a brand name. Actually, there is no difference between the two products, but in the consumer's mind, there is an advantage because the consumer thinks that that brand name is a guarantee that, look, I don't have to worry about the quality now. It's going to be at least as good as the best rival products. That would explain why it's a marketing advantage, even though it's not technically actually an advantage. Quick check, is everyone comfortable with option A? Okay, I've got a few yeses on this. Perfect. Now, I'd like you guys to tell me why B and C are not correct whenever you're ready.
So B basically weakens if it's a yes. Because
Very good.
if consumers recognize the quality of products sold will drift over time, then they wouldn't buy products of a brand, and hence it weakens.
Very good. So the key over here is the word drift. Now, keep in mind that drift is not used in a positive way, okay? So drift is used in a negative sense. So when we say the quality of products sold under invariant, invariant means not changing. So brand names that don't change. So consumers recognize that the quality of products sold under brand names that don't change, that quality can drift over time. This is a negative. It's going to hurt brand names. It's not going to help you understand why brand names are a bigger marketing advantage than ever. Okay, good. Now, what do you guys think about option C? I was too confused to. Fair enough. So, in my experience, I think C is the most commonly marked incorrect option in this question, followed by B for Bravo. The other options, not so much, but C, definitely. Kush is saying irrelevant. Yes, Kush, it is irrelevant, but can we go one step deeper over there? Why is it irrelevant?
Okay, so let me try. So, because we are talking about customers and not how other corporations perceive brand names, right?
At a high level, that is correct. Yes. So this is why in the beginning when we were discussing the stimulus, we made it a point to fix that second situation firmly in our minds. It is a bigger marketing advantage than ever, right? So if you think about a marketing advantage for a brand name, you're typically going to be looking at consumers rather than corporations, right? So at a high level, that is absolutely one way to look at option C. Another one is like this. The stimulus tells us that brand names, so this is a brand, right? They are a bigger marketing advantage than ever, right? So let's put a big tick mark over here. Brand names are good, big marketing advantage. Now, as a result of this, what would you expect? Like, if a brand is very strong, what would you expect? If somebody acquires that brand, they would be interested in this brand, right? So the acquiring party would be interested in the brand. That would be the effect of the strength of the brand. But that's the problem. The question is asking us why? Why are brand names a bigger marketing advantage than ever? Not what is the effect of that bigger marketing advantage. So, if the marketing advantage is big, then yes, companies will be interested. But that doesn't help you understand why it's a bigger marketing advantage. It just tells you what's the effect of that marketing advantage. Quick check, is everyone okay with C? Okay, excellent. Now, let me move on to the next question. Right. If I remember correctly, this is also a medium difficulty question. Again, please go ahead. You have 2.5 minutes. Right, that's 2.5 minutes. Now, first things first, please check your answers. The correct answer is C, the third option. But before we go anywhere near C, I just want to quickly ask, was anyone tempted to mark option A? Let me have a quick yes on this or no. Okay, Kush was tempted by A, fair enough. Simran as well, fair enough. And Shovini. Now, the main thing we'll discuss in this question is A versus C, right? And of course, we can take any other options that you guys want to discuss. But first, let's quickly summarize the stimulus. I mean, this is very straightforward. To reduce productivity losses from employees calling in sick, Corporation X implemented a new policy requiring employees to come to work unless they were so sick they had to go to a doctor. Sounds like the sort of thing that, companies would do. But a year after the policy was implemented, a study found that Corporation X's overall productivity losses due to reported employee illnesses had increased. So the situation is relatively straightforward. They would have expected that if employees are going to have to come to work, then the productivity should go up. But actually, they found that productivity losses due to reported illnesses had actually gone up. So this is what we need to reconcile over here. Now, let's take a look at option A. After the policy was implemented, employees more frequently went to the doctor when they felt sick. Take your time, read option A carefully, check what it tells you and what it doesn't tell you, and then tell me, why should we take option A out? Fair enough, that's fine. So you could mark option A, but when you analyze option A now, where do you think it may fall short?
Because the option does not specify anything about the productivity of the employees,
Good.
how that would play out if employees went to the doctor more often.
Good. So, at a very basic level, option A is telling us that they more frequently went to the doctor. But did they not come to work? That's not clear in option A. Simran, is that the point you're making?
Yes.
Perfect. Now, let's take a look at what happens if we assume that they actually stayed at home in option A. Now, imagine, so let's say that this is, again, I can't see the stimulus right now, but I think this is over 1 year, right? If I remember correctly. So let's say we're talking about last year and we're talking about this year. Let's say last year, the productivity losses, let's say we're talking about maybe, let's quantify it. Let's just write down 1,000, whatever, employee hours, right? So employee hours. Now, this year, they expected that 1,000 to go down, right? But let's try to get into what this 1,000 could be broken into. What proportion of employees do you think would be so sick that they had to go to a doctor? Like, this is just, you can come up with any number you want, but just give me an idea. Like, do you expect it to be a large proportion of this, or do you expect it to be a relatively small proportion? Yeah, Kush is saying relatively small. So let's say they lost 1,000 employee hours, right? How much of that would be from employees who were so sick that they had to go to a doctor? And how much of that would be from people who were, sick but not sick enough to go to a doctor? As Kush pointed out, yeah, and as Kush and Shohini are pointing out, normally, when you fall ill, it's for relatively small things, like a cold or something, and you just stay at home and it gets okay in a few days. But if you have to go to a doctor, that's typically more serious. So normally we would expect, a relatively small proportion of employees to be so ill that they had to go to a doctor. Now, for the sake of convenience, I'm going to write down maybe 20%, out of 1,000, maybe 200 employee hours were lost when employees were so ill that they had to go to a doctor, and 800 employee hours were lost with normal illnesses, nothing too serious. Now, this year, what they thought would happen is that these 800 will show up to work, and yeah, you can still keep the people who are the minus 200 can stay. So this is what they thought would happen, but what actually ended up happening is that the productivity losses increased. So something more than 1,000, say they lost maybe, let's say, 1,100 or 1,200. The number doesn't matter, it just has to be greater than 1,000. Now, this is the problem with option A. if we are saying that employees more frequently went to the doctor when they felt sick, and all those employees stayed at home as well, what we're basically saying is these seriously ill people, right? That number went up by a massive amount. From 200, it went not just to 800 or 1000, it crossed 1000 because that's the only way to increase the productivity losses. Again, I'm not sure how well I've explained this, but let me just quick check. Kush, does that make sense?
That makes sense, yes.
Perfect. So we would have to assume that the people who were seriously ill, they more frequently went to the doctor to such an extent that they not only met the previous number, but they crossed the entire previous number. This would be extremely unexpected. So when they say more frequently would have to go beyond the entire productivity losses for last year, just from this group of employees. That's why option A is not as good as option C. Let's take a look at C. Employees coming into work when sick often infect many of their co-workers. So when they're saying many of their co-workers, it's like a chain reaction. And of course, I think all of us, from what we've seen during the pandemic, we know what happens when people, do something like this. Quick check, is everyone comfortable with C and taking option A out? Both of those, please. Let me have a yes if you're comfortable with both of those. I've got a couple of yeses. How about Shashank is confirmed? Simran, is this one okay? Perfect. Now, guys, quick check. Should we move on to the final question? It's a high difficulty question. If you have any doubts in the other options, please feel free to unmute and ask.
I have a question on the difficulty level of this question. GMAT Club says it's about a 500, 600 difficulty question, but is that a fair estimate? Uh, can we rely on the difficulty level that GMAT Club shows?
So, in the official guide, this would be a medium difficulty question. Question 573, that would be medium difficulty. And the reason I'm going by the official guide is, see, GMAT Club has a slightly different audience. So, one of the primary things you'd notice in GMAT Club is these are people who would be, let's say, more interested or more committed to their GMAT prep, right? So a lot of people don't actually go to GMAT Club. Like many of my students haven't even heard of, I mean, not many, but quite a few of my students have not even heard of GMAT Club. The other thing is the way they measure difficulty, right? It has a lot of things going on that we have no idea about. Things like how much time people took. So they actually take things like that into account, whereas the GMAT doesn't. And the
Okay.
GMAT measures difficulty by looking at, a much wider or a much more diverse population than GMAT Club does. So GMAT Club has, let's say, skews in a particular way, and that could affect these difficulty levels that you see. So I typically tend to go with the official guide's classification, and their classification, if I remember correctly, is that this is a medium difficulty question.
Okay, got it. Thank you. It did feel like more difficult than a 500, 600 level, and hence the question.
I know, definitely. So in this one, in fact, that's why I chose it. So even though it's classified as a medium difficulty question, it's definitely a very good question.
Yeah. Okay.
It is a good question. All right, guys. Now let's move to the final question. Again, 2.5 minutes. Please go ahead. Okay, so that's 2.5 minutes. Please check your answers. The correct option is option C. C for Charlie. And I think the most commonly marked incorrect option over here is option D, the fourth option. Let's take the stimulus and then we'll move to option C and option D separately. Let's go ahead with the stimulus. In the country of Veltria, the past 2 years economic recession, right? So let's look at it as if this is now and okay, so there's been a recession for 2 years. So this is -1 and -2. So this is where the recession would have started. Sales are down about 7%. So sales are down 7% over the last 2 years. Clothing wholesalers have found that the proportion of credit extended to retailers that was paid off on time fell sharply in the first year of the recession, but returned to pre recession levels in the second year. Now, this is one of the reasons that I like this question. It makes us think about how this sort of stuff works in the real world, credit, right? But first, let's just quickly put this down. The proportion of credit that was extended to retailers that was paid off on time. So let's say we started with some number right before the recession. So this would be the pre-recession levels. That fell sharply during the first year of the recession. So remember, the first year will be between -2 and -1. But it recovered to pre-recession levels, right? In the second year of the recession. So whatever this level was, it returned to that. So the paradox is that sales are down 7%, but the proportion of credit that was paid off on time, even though it fell sharply, that proportion has recovered to pre-recession levels, even though the recession is still going on. Quick check, is everyone okay with the stimulus, the information given to us?
Just a question, Ajitesh, regarding the part about the proportion. Can you go over that again?
Yeah, the proportion of credit extended to retailers, right? So think about your wholesalers, right? So you've got distributors, you've got wholesalers, you've got retailers, right? There's a whole chain.
Yes.
Now, wholesalers, they may give some amount of inventory at, they may extend credit for that, right? They may not immediately ask for payment. So let's say that they extended $10,000 of credit. Before the recession, maybe 80% of it was paid off on time. So let's say you have to pay it back within 1 week. But in the first year of the recession, this 80% dropped to maybe, let's say, it dropped sharply. So maybe it dropped to something like 30%. But the second year of the recession, it bounced back to 80%. Quick check, makes sense?
Yeah, got it.
Perfect. Okay, which of the following, if true, most helps to explain the change between the first and the second year of the recession in the proportion of credit not paid off on time? Let's head to option C. Hang on, let's go through these options one by one. A, the total amount of credit extended to retailers by clothing wholesalers increased between the first year of the recession and the second year. Now, the problem with this is if the total amount of credit that wholesalers are giving to retailers has increased, that on its own does not tell us why the proportion has bounced back, right? So between the first and second year, if more credit has been extended, actually it should lead to more problems. So normally, remember, this is not a certain relationship, but normally the more credit you extend, the more, let's say, difficulties you will find with your customers in paying it back on time. At a basic level, if you give more credit to your retailers, that's not going to help explain why the retailers are able to pay it back, right? Quick check. Let me have a yes on this if we're comfortable with why A is out. Okay, I've got a few yeses on this. So this is a bit of a warm up for option C, but let's take a look at B. Between the first and second years of the recession, clothing retailers in Veltria saw many of their costs increase. So again, the first year and the second year, if the costs went up, then that's going to hurt their ability to pay back the credit. So option B is exactly the opposite of what we want. We don't want the retailers' costs to go up, because if their costs go up, again, they will not be in as good a position to pay back their credit on time. So B is out. Now we reach the first of the two options that I wanted you guys to take. C. It's the correct option. Why is it correct?
Hi, Ajitesh. So basically, in the question stem, they're talking about a proportion or percentage. Now, here they are saying after the first year, if the bankrupted businesses exited the business, it actually gives us the answer that maybe who are existing in the business, they are again paying back on time, and the bankrupted businesses are always like already eliminated from the scene. So the proportion again went back. Is it correct?
Yes, that is absolutely correct. So let me put numbers to that. So let's take the ones that we did in the discussion with Shashank. So let's say earlier retailers used to pay back 80% of the credit on time. But in the first year, that dropped to 30%. And in the second year, it's back to 80%. Right? Remember, this is not the amount of credit. As Shohini mentioned, this is the proportion of credit that is paid back on time. So what option C is telling us is of all the retailers who were facing financial difficulties, right? During the first year, so in this period, virtually all, that means almost all the retailers who were facing financial difficulties, right? They were forced to go out of business. So that's great, but what does it mean for the second year? What type of retailers will be left? That's what Shohini is getting at. So, what Shohini is trying to tell us is if in the first year, almost all the retailers who were facing financial difficulties were forced to go out of business, that leaves you with the financially strong retailers. And that helps us understand why, even though there is a recession, the proportion of credit that was paid back on time has gone back to pre recession levels, because now it is your financially strong retailers who are left in the market. Quick check. Are we comfortable with C? Okay, I think I've received a couple of yeses on this. Kush, is this one okay? Kush is also confirmed. Excellent. Okay, good job. Now, one more option for you guys. How do we take D out? Again, as I said, in my experience, D is the most commonly marked incorrect option here. How or why do we take it out?
So I marked D, but
Mhm.
I now when I read it, I think it's not correct because even though the retailers might have attempted to increase their sales by giving higher discounts, the option doesn't say anything about them paying back their credit, and hence it's not a good option.
Right. But remember, in these questions, we may have to think a little bit, right? Like, what does this mean? So let me ask you, if they offer discounts, what would that normally do to their ability to pay back credit?
It might increase the frequency of selling, but it may not sort of increase their profits per se, and hence their ability to pay back credits would not necessarily increase.
Good. I like how you're using the phrase not necessarily. That is absolutely correct. I think it is 100% certain that if they discount merchandise, then their profit margins will fall,
Yes.
right? But as you said, the profits may or may not fall, right?
Yeah.
Excellent. Now we need to just combine that with one more piece of information. So if this is now, and this is -1, and this is -2, clothing retailers attempted to stimulate sales in the second year of the recession. The second year of the recession will be this period. But the question has already told us that sales are down 7%. And 7% is not a small number. I mean, if you think about the industry, like the clothing industry as a whole, if the entire industry tanks 7%, that is a problem. Anyway, let me get back on point over here. We have been told that, okay, so the option says they attempted to stimulate sales. Okay, now maybe it worked, maybe it did not work, but the bottom line is sales are not back at pre recession levels. They are at -7%. But somehow the proportion of credit that was paid back on time is back to pre recession levels. That's the problem with option D. Option D is basically telling us that they attempted to stimulate sales, but whatever they did, it did not help them get back to pre-recession levels. They are still at -7% as an industry, and they have got there by discounting merchandise, which means their profit margins are down. So their revenues are down, their profit margins are down. How are they able to pay back the credit on time? I mean, at least back at pre-recession levels. That's the problem with option D. Quick check, guys. Is that okay? Give me a yes if this one's fine. Okay, excellent. Now let's. Yeah, I mean, option E is just one of those random options. Now we've reached the end of this question. Quick check. Any questions about this? Any doubts that you have?
One question, Ajitesh. Can I
Mhm,
also look at option D? If you see at
mhm.
option D, it says clothing stores in Veltria attempted, right? So the word attempted means it doesn't necessarily means they were successful to stimulate sales, right? They could have failed. They could have attempted giving discounts to stimulate sales, but because the word attempted is used here, that doesn't necessarily mean that they have succeeded.
That is
Um,
absolutely correct. Yes.
so can I use that and that uncertainty associated with the word attempt to eliminate option D as well?
Yes, but you can also combine it with the information in the stimulus, right? Which basically tells us that whether they attempted to stimulate or not, the sales are definitely not back to pre-recession levels, right? They're at -7%.
Correct. Yeah. Yeah.
Yes, you can combine the two and you can say, even if they attempted to stimulate sales by discounting merchandise, at the end of the day, as of now, sales are not back to pre-recession levels.
Correct. Yeah.
The paradox is that somehow the proportion of credit that's paid back on time is back to pre-recession levels. So if the sales are not back, but the proportion of credit paid is back, what's going on? We don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. So this is more like it's basically the questions asking us how would you manipulate a ratio to get back the original number once it's like fallen down, right? Yeah, so
Yes.
I mean, if you view it that way, it's just asking us how can you, because you can't manipulate the numerator as such in these kind of cases, right? So you would just say, how can I manipulate the denominator to get back
So hold
the
on, hold on. You can manipulate the numerator as well. So if you keep the numerator as the amount of credit extended, right? Or the
yeah,
amount of credit extended paid back on time, that amount can change. Like
oh
earlier,
yeah,
if you had 1,000 retailers, right, and you extended, let's say, $1 million to all of them, now you have maybe only 100 retailers, but you're extending a lower amount, but the proportion is higher that was paid off on time,
correct, yes, yes, okay,
right?
yeah,
Awesome. All right, so
correct.
that brings us to the end of this session and of this entire critical reasoning course. I would like to thank all of you for attending this session. Kush, Shashank, Simran, Shohini, thanks from my side. It has been a pleasure interacting with you, seeing how you guys approach critical reasoning. I hope that this course has been helpful. And from my side, all the best for your prep. Let's keep in touch and just all the best. You're welcome, Kush. You're welcome,
Thanks,
Shohini.
Ajitesh.
You're welcome, Shashank. You're welcome, Simran. All the best.